Hi, this is Paul Cameron, cinematographer, and you're now listening to Go Creative Show.
Hey everyone, my name is Ben Consoli. I am a director and owner of BC Media Productions, and this is the Go Creative Show, the show dedicated to creative professionals in the video production, filmmaking, television, and music industries. Today I invite Director of Photography Paul Cameron on the show to discuss his work on the new HBO series Westworld. The Go Creative Show is supported by our friends at Kessler, making innovative tools for filmmakers. Visit them at KesslerCrane.com. Rule Boston Camera. Buy, rent, create at Rule.com. Newsshooter.com. Essential news for real-world shooters. Shutterstock.com. Hedge for Mac, the fastest way to back up media. And PremiumBeat.com. Premium, royalty-free music and sound. So I've been very excited about Westworld for a while now, ever since I started seeing the previews and the still frames online. I've been getting really, really pumped about the show, and it certainly did deliver. The pilot episode was absolutely beautiful and shot by Paul Cameron, who is our guest today. So we're going to talk to him about all things Westworld, and that's coming up in just a few minutes. But before we get there, I want to talk about Rule Boston Camera, one of our fantastic sponsors. Rule is the place to go to purchase and rent all of your production equipment. And I rent a lot from them. And I just recently purchased a bunch of stuff too. I got the Pix E5 by Sound Devices, and I love it. But anyway, you go there to buy things, you go there to rent things, but you also go to learn. And that's really one of the core values of Rule Boston Camera, and that's why we love those guys. So they have events every month and all sorts of different things. They're called learning labs. They have pub nights, which are evening events. But the best part about it is they're all free, and they all get posted to their Vimeo page. So let me just give you an example. On Wednesday, October 12th, they have a learning lab, and it's called Audio Basics Location Mics. So this is the type of information that we all need to know. And even if we know it, techniques change, and sometimes just learning new things is going to, make your audio recording on field game much, much better. And that's what this is all about. So they talk about best mic choices. They talk about lav techniques, hiding microphones, how to get the best sound on location, and so much more. And this is an event that goes from 10 a.m. to 12 noon, and it's free. And it's at Rule Boston Camera on Wednesday, October 12th. And then on Wednesday, October 19th, they have their garage sale. This is such a huge event. You can get an unbelievable savings on equipment there. It's cash only, and you have to be there physically. But if you are in the area, it's worth checking out. It's from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., and their garage sale is legendary. So I strongly suggest you guys check that out. All information and ability to RSVP is at rule.com, RULE.com, as well as access to their Vimeo page where they post all of their events. So check it out, rule.com. And lastly, Hedge for Mac. So Hedge is the fastest application for importing and backing up media on OS X. It has a really simple interface, but it's very, very powerful, and it's built for video, photo, and audio in mind. A couple of things about it that are great. One, you can import multiple sources to multiple destinations all at the same time. So that's great for those of us that want multiple backups of our media. But really the most important thing is the speed of it. It's optimized for files 100 megabytes or larger, and that's really what we're working with here. But it's even faster than the Finder. So before I was using Hedge, I was basically taking files in the Finder and putting it into folders. And that's fine, but you don't get the peace of mind that you get from Hedge, knowing that things have been backed up, knowing that things have been verified. I mean, that's what you get with Hedge. So how do you get it? Well, two ways. One, you can go to hedgeformac.com and get the free version, but I strongly suggest that you get the paid version. It's only $100, and it'll give you the access to all of the great speed and power that Hedge for Mac is really known for. And it's not that expensive. And you can get a 20% discount by going to hedgeformac.com/Go Creative Show. So why the hell not? Hedge for Mac, hedgeformac.com/Go Creative Show. Or you can click on the Hedge for Mac link on our website, gocreativeshow.com. Either way, you get 20% off the paid version, and it is the way to go. All right, it's time for our spotlight. Paul Cameron is the visionary director of photography for countless feature films, television shows, and commercials, and he's here today to discuss his work on the HBO series Westworld. Paul and I discuss all his lighting and lensing techniques, working with Jonathan Nolan, shooting on film, not relying on visual effects, and how Paul masterfully combines a Western with science fiction. So I'm here with Paul Cameron, cinematographer of countless films and television shows, and also the director of photography of what we're talking about today, HBO's Westworld. Paul, thank you so much for being on.
Oh, thanks, Ben. Good to be here.
So first of all, this show is definitely going to be one of my favorites. This is exactly what I like. That mix of that little bit of science fiction that kind of keeps it feeling fresh and futuristic, but also grounded in reality. And I think that is such a great combination. And that's what I love about Westworld. And your work on the pilot is really spectacular.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think it's. I have to agree with you. The material itself was, what attracted me to it initially. Along with the personnel, but it was a good opportunity.
So, how did this opportunity come about for you?
Well, fortunately, I got a phone call from Jonathan Nolan asking to meet, and I was familiar with Jonathan's work, as a writer, certainly with his brother Christopher, and his directorial and show running experience on Person of Interest, which was kind of a number one network show at the time. So, I could only imagine Jonathan plus Westworld would equal something,
So Jonathan Nolan is Christopher Nolan's, obviously Christopher Nolan, the director. It's Christopher Nolan's brother. And a lot of people may not know his name as much as they know Christopher. So just, if you could, just a little bit of background on Jonathan's work so we can all get up to speed.
Well, listen, Jonathan, I think he wrote Memento. If I'm not mistaken, he wrote Memento, which was the film that his brother Christopher did that kind of shocked the film world a little bit and put him on the map. And I know Jonathan's gone on to write Batman and Interstellar with his brother, amongst the Prestige and other projects. So they've kind of had a co-writing brother relationship for a while. And I think for Jonathan, it was kind of, the beginning was Person of Interest was his first real go at things, and became number one network show. And now Westworld's just launching, and it has a good following already. So it's looking good for him.
And Jonathan is he writer director of Westworld?
Yeah, well, Jonathan is actually he's the show creator along with his wife Lisa Joy. They were approached by J.J. Abrams with the idea of doing Westworld, and both Jonathan and Lisa thought it would be fabulous. So they started to develop it a bit, and they came up with the idea of just doing the pilot. Obviously pitched it to HBO, and HBO knew it was kind of be a big show, and I guess they got on board with Warner Brothers TV, and they've put together co-production, and off we went.
Now, is there something different about the way you approach your working relationship with a director who's also a writer? Is that like a luxury for you to kind of have a 2-in-1 situation?
Well, I think it's always great when directors have written their own films. To me, they know their films inside out, and if they haven't written them, then the next step is that they know them inside out. That they're obviously passionate about it and know what they're doing. In this case, Jonathan and his wife Lisa, I believe they wrote just about every episode of the 10 episodes, but certainly the pilot, they wrote every word. And yeah, it's fabulous. It's a shortcut to the content. Basically, it's I like, as a director of photography, I think it's important to talk about story and character and the writing, and there's often things that people do writing wise or story wise that seems to read very well, and then when you start being with the material for week after week, and now suddenly it's time to shoot it, questions might come up. And I love the fact to working with filmmakers like Jonathan, you're able to talk about story and character and explore it, because it's all something that gets reflected in the cinematography as well.
Did Jonathan have a really clear vision for the way that Westworld will look? Like when you guys first started talking about it, what were the conversations there?
Well, listen, when I jumped on board, Nathan Crowley was already on, a production designer, and Nathan's been working with Christopher Nolan for years, and comes from a big movie league of production design. So, and I knew from the get go that there would be something about this project that would be kind of a bigger scale, and
Yeah.
I think it's the first thing is you look at the structure of the original movie and the original content, and on a lot of levels, the actual show, the current show hasn't changed that much. But I think in this case, the biggest change is, look, how do we make this, a beautiful Western park and a beautiful landscape, and how do we make this opulent and where people are spending a lot of money, and then how do we make it very eerie and edgy in the operations center, and so those were the beginnings of the conversations, and then we started talking about locations. So it's, where is Westworld? And Jonathan, Nathan were talking about scouting some pretty big landscapes, like John Ford type landscapes, like Death Valley, Monument Valley, and some big landscapes we've seen on many great westerns, including Moab, which is obviously, I think, John Ford also shot there in his later films. I had shot a lot in Moab with Tony Scott on some projects, and when we started talking, Jonathan, Nathan, and I started talking, it kind of, we got excited by the idea of Westworld Park being, at Dead Horse Point in Moab, that perched above the Colorado River, would be a 30-story building built into the side of a mountain, and that's where the control center was, and that the Westworld Park would actually be in the Red Rock of Utah. So, that was the beginning week. So
Yeah.
then it's what about the set design? How do we utilize a very small stage, and Nathan came up with that kind of great glass walled set that's endless, and it's basically 6 glass rooms that would get turned around every night. So one day it would be manufacturing, then the next day it would be diagnostic, then the next day behavioral, then the next day it would be the wash down room where they come in and throw the bodies every night and wash them down. So that was one massive set that
Wow.
we turned over. And then there was a control room that actually has this practical 3D topographic map that spins, and this is something that Jonathan Nathan wanted to do without visual effects for the most part. So, we came up with this plan. Nathan built this topographical landscape based on a satellite photo we have from Moab, and then I projected with 2 2K projectors down onto the map so that the operations people can actually spin the map 3D within the scene and look at any given area of the park. So that's 2 weeks, and now the scale is bigging. And how do we handle locations like the basement of Westworld where they decommission the hosts? And we ended up scouting the Hawthorne Mall near LAX in Los Angeles, which is basically this abandoned old mall with like massive escalators that are just rotting for 20 years.
Yeah.
And we built this kind of the basement floor there, and there's a big scene with Anthony Hopkins and the original Wild Bill character, one of the first hosts he made in the park, where Jeffrey Wright goes down. They think there's some, security breach, and they go down and they find Anthony Hopkins decommissioning his old buddy Wild Bill. And, that was just a massive location. And, that Jeffrey Wright and everybody, they walk through basically 300 naked extras that are, playing the parts of decommissioned hosts. So,
And that was all in that Hawthorne Mall?
Yeah. So these, conceptually, these were kind of, big scale ideas, big movie ideas. And okay, so how do we do it for, the budget we have in 23 odd days or something like that? So, it was a great process because then we started thinking about, okay, let's, the town is going to have a train. So why not bring the train out to Moab and put the people in the train so that we could actually have them going through the landscape there and then pulling into town at the Western Park and Santa Clarita where the set was built. And then that kind of branched out to like, well, why don't we bring certain reverse angles of sets out to Moab so that when we cut to the reverse angles, we're actually in the actual landscape. So the idea is really multiplied of kind of how to get scale and how to make this a real world, and I so it was a little different than the original movie. So it was a long answer.
Well, reading about all the different sets, I mean, the thing that amazed me the most is that, I mean, you really do not get that impression when you're watching it, that you're in that much variety of location. I mean, it really is incredible. And hearing stories about how, like you were saying, the reverse shots being different than the primary shot. I mean, it really is incredible. Now, those sorts of like that plan, that strategy, was that made for budgetary reasons? Was it convenience? I guess what was the reason for doing something like that?
Well, I think there's two reasons. One is, the foremost reason I think for Jonathan, Nathan, and I was how to keep it real. And the way to keep it real is photograph it for real. And don't rely on visual effects. And listen, there's a great visual effects supervisor on the show who's done some great work. But in terms of solving things conceptually and photographically, I think the three of us come from a place like, where do we do that? Where's the right place to do this at the right time for the right reason? And then you look at it creatively that way. And then it's like, well, it's funny, if you're going to send a truck to Moab with 2 set walls, you might as well have 3 set walls in there. It doesn't cost that much more. Yeah. Does it cost more to bring a character from LA to put in a shot? Yeah, certainly. But, it's a process of creative choices first, and then, certainly budget. And then it's, can you solve something, with a visual effect, as opposed to a lot of films and shows now, which are like, let's just put up some blue screen and, we'll just virtual the hell out of this thing.
Yeah.
And, we'll figure it out later. And then you see it later and it's a bunch of people floating in CG spaces and it doesn't feel real at all,
I think what's so appealing about this is that, someone like me, where I enjoy sci-fi, but only when it's grounded in reality or somewhat of reality. And I think part of what I'm really drawn to with Westworld is that it does that. And there are moments, very slight moments, when you're kind of reminded that this is kind of a surreal environment, or maybe this is, years ahead in the future. Little things like for lack of a better word, the iPad. It's not really an iPad. It's just like but little things that the casts are holding and using, they clue you into, this isn't present day. But other than that, it really does feel, I mean, the costume design and the sets, even though they are futuristic, it doesn't feel like it's so far ahead that it's unrelatable.
Yeah, well, I think that was a big thing. Trish Underwood, she's a fabulous designer, and listen, again, early on, it's like, where is Westworld? What time period is it?
Yeah,
and I think you kind of you hit it correctly there. It's kind of a timeless time period in the maybe not so distant future. And looking back at the original film, you think about, Jesus, that was in the 70s or something like that. Okay, so it's 40 something years later. That film kind of had a bit of a, the futuristic train going into the desert, that could have been, 1990 or 2000, like it wasn't set to be that many years in the future. There's no attempt to do that here. It's more, I think it's more to take the idea that the control and the operations and the whole thing isn't taking place in the exact present, and that it's, it's kind of its own time frame and period. So there didn't want to be any reference to how things work or technology for a certain reason. I mean, you can see in the sets of the behavioral rooms and stuff, there's some kind of futuristic lights in a very kind of old structured glass walled concrete covered set. It's like walking into an old corporation and redoing it or something, and redoing the offices is kind of how it, so that was an idea too.
In developing the look in the way you're going to shoot this, how much did the original film come into play?
It didn't really come into play. It's, again, it's, I started to hit on it before, but it was more like a discussion of how do we make it, we wanted the Western town to feel classic, like more like again, like a John Ford movie or a big Western, and that's the experience of the people paying a lot of money to go to the park. So, we took over this old town, Melody Ranch in Santa Clarita, that actually Deadwood had shot at it also. So it was, since Deadwood had shot, it was very decrepit and brown and dark. And, it was very easy to look at that and say, this needs it needs a palette. It needs a new shine. It needs, a white building. It needs a green building. It needs, if I was going here, I wouldn't want to come into an old crappy looking town,
Yeah.
For whatever thousands of dollars a day to come to this place, you're going to want, 1,200, thread count sheets and a nice place to stay, and it's funny because I think there's even a line in the pilot where a couple gets off where she says something about it's a nice place, and he's like, "You better be from the amount we're paying." It's like, that's a reality, So the look, to go back to it was to keep this, more authentic, but kind of a little opulent and a little fresh, and make it feel, I don't want to say like theatrical, but there is something about it that we were giving like a slightly heightened sensibility to it, and you see it in the costumes, This is a time period where people wore their wardrobe for weeks and months until it was threadbare, But if you look at these characters, it always looks fresh because they're always repairing the costumes in the back, and they're, putting on new suits in the morning with, So, the cinematography wanted to be a bit opulent that way too, and it wanted to shine just a little bit and be a little sharp with the lighting, in the town. And then when we go into the operations center, I had more liberty to go a little darker and more interesting with looks in there. And night exteriors in the park and everything were fairly traditional at the end of the pilot. But it was also about putting together a look that what wouldn't be the next cinematographers that came on for the show, which ended up being an additional 4 or 5 to finish the season because of scheduling and whatnot, that they had a palette that they could go with that, it's in I've already seen it in a couple of episodes where, DPs are able to put a little bit of their own style into it. I have stuff I've shot that's not in the first episode. It's actually in the second episode with Tandy Newton running with her daughter in a field, and they come, run into the middle of a Indian massacre. And, these were like a whole flashback sequence that I established and that got put into the second episode where I use old vintage lenses and kind of came up with a much different, look for that. And now I'm seeing, again, in the other episodes that the directors of photography that went on to do the show, again, taken, this very classic looking, they're able to kind of twist it just a little bit to put their mark on it too, which I think is fantastic.
That must be odd, in a good way, to have worked so hard to develop the look of this pilot and then just kind of see it change over the course of the season, depending on who's, directing that photography. What does that feel like from your perspective?
Well, it feels like I'm on a big movie with a couple second units, with a bunch of second units. And, it's, there's some stuff that are good surprises and some stuff that are, that may not be, up to your liking 100%, but that's just the way it goes in a collaboration like that. And listen, everybody has, has different restrictions with budget and crew size and pressure with schedule and how to pull it off. So listen, we all have great days and we all have challenging days. And, I know all the DPs that were on the show are extremely talented and did an extremely great job. And, I look forward to the next season because I think it's going to be a whole new batch of people doing it.
Let's talk about some of your gear choices for this. First of all, what did you shoot the show on?
Well, fortunately, we shot it on film. So
all too rare nowadays, especially for TV.
Rare. So we, which was great because that was one of the first discussions with Jonathan, because I was going to, pitch the idea. And I said, would you, I think it was 10 minutes into the meeting, would you consider shooting on film? And he said, no, I'm not going to consider it. We're shooting on film.
Oh, wow.
And, he said it very respectfully, but I mean, I think he knew, that one of the reasons he called me, he knew I'd want to shoot it on film. And so that was a done deal. So we ended up, saying, okay, well, let's shoot, 3 per 35 mil film. We won't shoot, obviously we're going to shoot anamorphic because we're stuck with the 16:9 TV format. So that, that was a done deal. And, then I went about testing lenses and looks as I usually do. And, I think for me, the joy of shooting film is one thing, but then, coupling it with some lenses like some Cooke S4s and, some good film emulation, looks there,
yeah,
lighting wise. And, that made it very, very simple to create filmic looks, cinematic looks for it,
Well, let's talk about the lens package. What were you mostly relying on?
Well, again, I think almost everything's shot on the Cooke S4s, and except for the flashback scene, which again I think is in the second episode with Tandy Newton, where I used the Canon K35s with no coating lenses. So those are beautiful flares and stuff like that. But again, I love the Cookes. I test lenses all the time, and I retest them the same way all the time just to make sure I'm not out of my mind. And what I love about these lenses is that they just render faces incredibly well. Shape of faces, and there's a certain softness to them that's great in both film and HD. But just as a general optics, they're just fabulous lenses. And as much as I veer away from them, I always veer back to them. So that was pretty much. So then I guess the Cooke, the K35s for the flashbacks, and then just a little bit of Fujinon Premiere zooms in there for helicopter work, and some tracking vehicle stuff with horses and Moab and things like that, but almost all prime lenses.
Did you have a particular focal length selection that you used for some of the more common shots, like, faces or some of the environments that we see multiple times throughout the episode?
Yeah, listen, I think, for the most part, we use 21, 24, 32, and a 50 Cooke. Those are kind of the hero lenses, and occasionally a 65 Cooke. So those are the main focal lengths.
Now, you had alluded to some shots in episode 2, which I haven't seen just yet, but by the time this episode airs, people will certainly have seen that. And you're talking about a flashback, and I'm curious: is the flashback the perspective of the guests, or is it a perspective of people that are in Westworld?
Good question. I think it's, I think what, I don't want to give too much away. Certainly in the second episode, that many people have seen, and I guess you can stream it now, so it's not.
I wouldn't worry about that. I think people, it's not that much of a spoiler. Only 2 episodes in.
I think the reality is, there's a thing about the host called the reveries, which are the kind of gestures and the nuances of their behavior that kind of begin to kind of separate them, into having personalities and possibly some level of subconscious or consciousness, right?
Yeah.
So I think what you begin to see in the second episode is you see a sequence where, like Tandy Newton is with her daughter and they're running and chasing butterflies. And then, all of a sudden they look up and there's an Indian massacre going on and they run over into the middle of it. And, they survive. Fortunately, they don't get kidnapped, but there are people slaughtered around them. And then she runs back to the house with the daughter and the door opens and it's Ed Harris. And, it goes toward her and then she kind of blacks out. And then we cut to her and she's running naked through the halls of the Pacific Design Center in Los Angeles and through our sets. And she's bleeding from her gut and you don't know what's happening. And, she's actually escaped from one of the diagnostic rooms. So is she experiencing some type of behavior that was programmed? Is it some kind of cumulative memory as a host that functions on a different level than what we know as memory? These are the things that are beginning to get played with already in the second episode. So that's, to me, it's, the show itself starts conceptually really starting to engage, obviously in the second episode on and the potential for that. So that was, you'll see some sequences there that I shot in the second episode as well.
So how do you handle visually flashbacks that may or may not be, real? Are they programmed? Are they real? Who knows? But they're clearly different than the world that we exist in, that the guests see. How are you handling that visually?
Well, I think, for me, it was important to make it, to trigger in the same way, in a little more classic way. So when I talked about more classic photography and cinematography for the Western Park, I think I also handled that the same way with the flashbacks. For me, my instinct was to give it kind of a nostalgic feel, as opposed to a very stylized feel. So, I've done very stylized looks like in movies like Man on Fire in the past with hand crank cameras and reversal film, and it's it's radical and it's engaging and it's tactile. But that kind of effect didn't seem right for me on Westworld. I wanted to make it feel like, like a sweeter moment that this guest was experiencing. That this host was having. This memory. This is it possible this host is having this memory, or is it a nightmare, or is it a combination, or again, is it cumulative memory? Is it a new memory? What is it? So, but I can't really do it for anybody but the viewer. So I wanted to give the viewer this feeling of like, it's a little safer. It's a little more nostalgic. It feels softer. And then it goes crazy, just in the content and not so much in the photographic style. Because again, I, kind of felt like I didn't want to inflict a heavy style on these flashbacks or nightmares as they were.
Let's talk about your lighting strategy. I mean, clearly there are two very different feels in this. I mean, you have the Western look, and then you have the kind of futuristic laboratory-ish look. What did you do to separate the two, lighting-wise?
Well, I think the foremost thing was just the reality of both of those scenarios. One being predominantly day exterior. In a Western park and in Moab. So it was very important to me to shoot the right times of day. Unfortunately, the Western town was laid out years ago by a production designer and a TP when they originally built the town. So, sun comes up on one side and goes down on the other, which made it quite good.
Yeah.
But, again, specifically look-wise, it was, I wanted quite honestly, I wanted to be able to go in and out of interior locations without big stop poles and ND on windows and trying to tie things in at a low light level inside. So you see scenes like in a saloon where James Marsden or Ed Harris come in through the saloon door, or the Hector character with the shootout at the end. The saloon door is important. Going in and out of the saloon is important. James Marsden looking out the window and seeing Evan Rachel Wood at the same time of day and running after her. This Groundhog Day thing. these tie-ins, inside, outside, were very important. So it was important for me to, also light the interiors in this set, that I could go in and out of the exteriors without any tricks or any stop pulls.
What were you using in the saloon? That particular set is very interesting to me because the light seems really it's really bright, but everything's up against black. So it's a contrast that's really interesting. And actually, one of our listeners, Sean Boyde on Twitter, had asked a similar question. He was asking, why are they using LEDs in the bar scene in the Western? Feels odd given contrast to real life. Very cold. First of all, are you even using LEDs in here? I think that was presumptuous, but
I gotta break the news to Sean. You can't, they're not LEDs.
Sorry, Sean.
Sorry, Sean. Listen.
Well, I think what he's responding to is that it has that really, it's a harder light, and it is a little bit cooler than you may expect for an interior in the saloon. So just, I guess, curious about where that is coming from.
That pretty quickly. I mean, I think it's it's a combination of two. There's some scenes I'm very happy with, and then there's a few scenes later in the pilot I noticed that seemed a bit brighter than I had hoped, and they'd be in the finished product. But the reality was to kind of stay true to the fact that in the daytime it's ambient light that's lighting there inside there, right? I mean, if you look at that set, it's like a lot of saloons and places, they have big windows, and that's where the light comes in, and they, at night, obviously they're candlelit and firelight or gaslight, or, a combination of that. So, for the day interiors, they are a bit cool, but they're kind of based on a 5600, there wasn't any kind of swing to be cooler than actual daylight. But in contrast to the exterior, you have to imagine that, it's high noon in Santa Clarita, California, just north of Los Angeles, in the middle of August, with the sun pounding on light sand street. So it was, at 6 ASA, it was probably still a T8 or 11 outside there. And so I had, to light these interiors to that. So at a very low ISO, meaning 6 ISO, not 800, that I had to bring the level up to, certainly like a 5.6, 5.68. So I came up with a rig, and it's a rig that I kind of use a lot. I mean, it's a theory I use a lot for a lot of sets, and it's, what I kind of call boxing the set, which is basically, running, all 4 walls with a series of lights. Normally in a set, you'd kind of come up and over the edges, but this is a practical building, so I built the rig within that. So it's basically like bars of lights to constantly use as side or backlight, or somewhat front 3/4 and a back 3/4. So basically, I think I had 16 Arri M40s rigged in there. So depending on which direction I'm looking at, there's probably like 4 to 6 4Ks on. And I put those through chimeras, and instead of the standard chimera diffusion, I use white bed sheet inside the chimera to soften it as much as possible.
Really?
Yeah, but by nature, you take a number of those lights and you crank them up. There's a thing about lighting and volume that's very, the hardest thing to do with volume is quality of light. And you'll see, it's much easier in lower light levels and close-ups, because we can lower the lights down. You can scrim the hell out of the light. You can put a big muslin underneath the light and soften the hell out of it. And then the big wide shots, you pull the frame out and put the chimeras on and drive it up for big wides and multiple cameras. So, I had to come up with a system not only that would be good for us, but would also, hopefully a rig that would kind of stay intact for everybody else shooting the show,
I think it looks really good. And I think one of the things that I love about the saloon is I think the saloon, even more than the exteriors, it gives you that feel that this is the opulence that you were talking about. There's something, it's shiny. It's like the paint is brand new. The light is glistening off the black paint. And I think that just the choice of having the interior being black, and it seems like the paint choice had a little bit of shine to it, that I think gives you that hard edge that maybe Sean is, translating in his eyes as LED. But I think those are the types of things that give you that clue that this is a new world, even though it's supposed to represent an old world, sort of like the way that Disney would do it or something.
Exactly.
You are listening to the PremiumBeat.com Song of the Week. It's called Spirit of the West by Olive Musique. PremiumBeat.com is where to go for all of your royalty-free music and sound effects. You head over to PremiumBeat.com and you have access to thousands of royalty-free tracks for as low as $49 each. And it's not just single tracks. For many of their songs, they offer cut-downs, a 10-second, a 15, a 30, a 60. They even offer loops, so you have maximum control and can adjust the songs to best suit your project. Of course, I couldn't pass up an opportunity to play a Western theme song, obviously. So this is the one for you, Spirit of the West by Olive Musique. You can get a link to it in the show notes at gocreativeshow.com, or just head on over to PremiumBeat.com. All right, let's take a minute and talk about Kessler. The Kessler Shutter Dolly is the latest innovation in camera dollies and finally provides filmmakers with the performance and versatility dollies in its class have always lacked, until now. The Shutter Dolly utilizes standard speed rails and can be operated manually or in conjunction with Kessler's motion control solutions, CineDrive and Second Shooter Plus. For more information, visit KesslerCrane.com. It's also a good place to see a video of how this shutter dolly actually works, and it's very cool, and I'm really excited to use it. And I suggest you check it out, KesslerCrane.com. And lastly, Shutterstock.com. So Shutterstock.com has nearly 3 million royalty-free video clips. And that's on top of the photography and the music that they have. I mean, it really is a home for millions and millions of great products to purchase over there. The pricing is simple, so it's really easy to budget. And you can buy video packs. So you can pay up front for a collection of downloads and enjoy a significant savings. So what I mean by that is, let's say you needed to buy 25 HD videos. Now you could buy them separately, or you can buy a 25 HD pack. And when you buy the pack, you end up saving over $250. So that's just one way that you can get great savings at Shutterstock.com. But what I like most about it is that the quality of the footage is great. They have a huge selection of 4K, and they make it really easy to find what you're looking for, too. So obviously, you can type in something in the search box, but I prefer to use these Director's Choice collections. So these are collections that are curated in all different types of categories. So a couple that stand out: aerials, urban time-lapse, around Latin America. They have now theme ones for Halloween in the fall, and they also have a great collection called Director's Cuts, which are shots inspired by famous directors like Quentin Tarantino and David Fincher, Wes Anderson. It's really great to see these collections put together. And when you do, that's the best way to really appreciate the quality at Shutterstock.com. So I can't suggest it enough. Head over to Shutterstock.com. You will not be let down. It's really great over there. And I suggest you check it out. All right, it's time to finish up our interview. We have a remaining 20 minutes or so with the great Paul Cameron talking about Westworld, and that's all coming up right now. Let's talk about the camera movement. A lot of different types of camera movement. Obviously, helicopter stuff. You have horse scenes with people riding horses all over the place. You've got sort of a lot of action shots, especially that last big shootout at the end of the first episode. What were some of your camera motion choices?
Well, I think the foremost discussion that Jonathan and I had, and we're very clear with Chris Harhoff, the A camera Steadicam operator, and Barry Iodine, the B operator, and myself, obviously operating when we had a third camera. It was, listen, there's something about just as a basic thing, the characters move the camera, and that's the basis for a lot of things, so that you punctuate things dramatically with a camera movement when more often than not. Then there's the reality of kind of moving the masters, which we thought would be kind of an interesting combination, because look, a lot of these scenes, there's 3 to 5 people, multiple characters, and I'm throwing around 3 or 4 cameras at one time with a big wide at the same time.
Yeah.
So, I shoot that way. It's a style that I developed with Tony Scott that, luckily Jonathan liked a lot of that approach, because he could get, 2, 3 close-ups while he's doing a moving master. So that was one thing. But one of the main things I think we tried to do just thematically, which was interesting, and you'll see it in the beginning of the first episode, is like, you're watching an aerial shot and suddenly the camera tilts up in a very mechanical way. You'll see other shots where, we're on something and the camera kind of pans in a very mechanical way. Mm. And this is something that Jonathan started talking about early on, is he wanted to have these opportunities, he called them, whereas when you kind of least expect it, you have this kind of little subtle camera movement. So he was just like, I'm not sure when, I'm not going to be able to tell you always why, I just want it that way.
Yeah.
And so we did it. And it's this idea that, like a CCTV or a Disneyland or a theme park that, a place that's, being monitored, we wanted it to make this feel like everything is coming from a place of being monitored.
Yeah.
As if, the bigger shots, which you'll see of some of the Western Park, break down into close-ups, then suddenly, come onto the, dissolve into the map, and then, actual into the control room. So we wanted a syntax in that camera movement, something that was a reminder that it was just not so much people watching from the outside, but people watching from the inside. So that was that. And then, the other one you pointed, I think, is a good one, is the shootout at the end. It's, there was in the original cut, there was a much longer version and bloodier version of that sequence. And when we shot it, it was quite a long, intricate sequence. And I think, again, having a collaborator also like Chris Harhoff, Steadicam, a camera operator, is, we wanted, we were able to sit down and say, listen, we have this preconception of these shots that we want to do, these dolly shots. And, we storyboarded it. So, it's a dolly with a certain swing of the gun, and then the gun, is there, and then we counter there, the gun is there. So kind of, we had this idea of this choreography, and, Chris kind of said, well, let's do this kind of wicked hinging, in, front, back, over, so this kind of counter move that would whip the character's gun over to, the next subject, and bam, and then the camera would wrap around in front, So we developed this kind of repetitive camera movement that we did for all the shots. And, that, listen, I've shot a lot of action. A lot of people have shot a lot of action, and it's how do you add something to it? And I think, in this case, again, for what it was, we added another level to the camera movement there that I think made it a little more interesting than usual, I hope.
It certainly did. I'm really interested in your approach in the more repetitive shots. There are 3 or 4 scenes that happen multiple times throughout the first episode. And I'm curious just to how you approach those, because, every time someone sees it, the first time they see it, it's brand new, but then every other time there's a familiarity with it. And do you embrace that as you're shooting it, or are you changing things subtly to, push storyline?
Well, for sure, we change things subtly to push the storyline. I mean, we wanted it to feel repetitive, and so by the second time, it might be, oh wow, that's the same shot or the same day or what's the same thing. But then the third time, Evan Rachel Wood comes down the stairs, and she throws a very small look towards the kitchen. You notice it, right?
Yeah.
And then when you're out on the porch and she walks by her dad, and the camera doesn't cut away from her dad right away, and it did the last 2 times, you notice it. And then you watch Peter Abernathy start to shake a little when he starts to talk to his daughter, Then the 4th time, when she walks by and crosses and reveals, it's not Peter, it's not, the father that we were used to the three days before. Now the bartender is her father.
Yeah.
So, they were very conscious, subtle, like, how do we come up with something repetitive that will reveal itself in a different way, And, it's as simple as, well, we have, there's an aspect to it that everybody wants to do a different shot of something, and nobody ever wants to come back to kind of the same shots.
Yeah.
But that's what this is. When you cut the James Marsden inside the train, he does sit in the same seat, and he does look out the window at the same time. And he does get off and bump into the big guy at the same time. And he walks by the sheriff, who's talking about Hector at the same moment, So there is an importance to the cadence and the familiarity to the shots. And I think it's something that, was developed. Certainly we developed it and stayed true to it. And I think, obviously we kind of set the tone for it and the reality for what Westworld is. And I think you're going to see it come unhinged quite a bit. So
I'm excited for that.
Less of a need to, it's like training people. The pilot is basically like a training session for viewers, how to watch the series,
You've done so much great feature work. I'm looking at your IMDb here. There's a million things here. We've all seen them. Most recently, it's in post-production, but you just finished Pirates of the Caribbean's next installment. You mentioned the Commuter a few minutes ago. How does the feature film world compare to these large-scale television shows like Westworld?
Well, I think, speak for the experience on Westworld. It's, obviously a big budgeted first episode, and it's costly because it's the conceptualization of it, and it's building the sets, it's building the town, it's building the train that goes through the town.
Yeah.
So what they look for in a show like this is how to amortize it throughout the course of a series, so that it's not so expensive across the board doing the show. But I think, from my experience on this, as opposed to, previous pilots, which I've only shot like 3 or 4 in the past, is that, listen, we all know there's great content on cable and TV right now. It's, we've seen it in the last 10 years just grow like wildflowers, So, there's a multitude of shows that we can go to, and specifically dramatic shows that we can go to, and, we've got, this kind of monster of a film industry that still exists, that kind of is making massive monies off of franchise and again, comic book heroes, and it's spending less time and money and risk on dramatic projects. So we're seeing this bridging, obviously, of content through stations like HBO and Showtime and other cable and network shows, and they're developing interesting content. And I think that's, for a cinematographer, or hopefully for anybody in the business, as any craftsperson in this business, it's an extremely fabulous time, because you do get a call from a guy like Jonathan Nolan saying, hey, we want to do this really cool thing. And, you sit down with them and they're talking big movie style.
Yeah.
And, it's, it's expensive. But again, it comes down to any big movie, or anything, or any big budget, whether you've got a $3,000 budget, 33 million, 30 million, 300 million, it's always the same questions. It's how do we make the right creative choices for the time and the money that we have, to make, to make it, the best possible product on the screen as possible. And, I think on something like this, it's what's exciting to me about it is that it's the right people at the right time. a guy like Jonathan and Nathan Crowley and Trish Underwood and the people involved in it is like to make certain creative choices for the right reasons and watch people be so passionate about it is very exciting to me. And, I've never had a stigma about television. I've just predominantly done, features and commercials in between. And I've done very little pilots, more probably because of the content. And now, in the past 2 years, I've read, incredible pilots and, unfortunately, had to pass on a few of them because of, thankfully for employment of pirates and movies like that. But,
Yeah.
but, you read these things and you get excited. You're like, Jesus, I love that story, and it's like, well, Jesus, it's not a 2-hour movie. Okay, but look, how long is the episode 1 of Westworld? It's a minute and 15, an hour and 15 or something. So, these are, great opportunities right now. And I hope to shoot a couple pilots this year. And, there are a couple friends that have been doing them that have been doing great work and, hopefully get the opportunity to work with them. And it's very exciting.
Well, I can't thank you enough for spending time with us here on Go Creative Show. The show looks amazing. And I know you were only involved in the pilot, but very much looking forward to the rest of the season. Where can people go to find you online?
Well, I've got a website. I think it's paulcamerondp.com.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the best place to find me. And that's it. You can find me today. I'm actually on my way to Comic-Con later to watch episode 2 with Jonathan and Lisa. So I'm excited to see it.
Oh, how cool. Yeah. Paul Cameron, PaulCamerondp.com. You can have access to, certainly his IMDb, but he's got some fantastic commercial work and lots of automotive commercials, which I actually wanted to talk about today, but we ran out of time. So maybe we'll have you back to talk about Pirates, and we can get into some of your car stuff, because I think that would be really interesting to learn about your strategies for shooting and lighting cars. I think that'd be fun if you'd want to talk about it.
No problem, Ben.
Excellent.
Anytime. Okay.
All right, Paul. Thank you so much for being on, and we'll talk to you next time.
Okay. Thanks, Ben.
Paul Cameron, thank you so much for being on the show, and really congratulations on the amazing work on Westworld. I hope you guys learned a lot from his interview. I know I did. I want to thank Matt Russell from Gain Structure Sound for mixing, mastering, and making the show sound so good. Matt Russell at gainstructure.com and on Twitter at gainstructure. And while you're on Twitter, you can tweet us at Go Creative Show, at Go Creative Show. Send us your guest suggestions and questions for upcoming guests, and also your thoughts on the show. I want to thank our sponsors, Hedge for Mac, Rule Boston Camera, Kessler Crane, Newsshooter.com, Shutterstock.com, and PremiumBeat.com. Without these people, the show just simply would not exist. So you got to support those that support us so that we can continue bringing you these great shows for free every week. I love doing them. You love listening to them. And what a great combination that makes, right? So much cool stuff in store on Go Creative Show. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.